time to talk about how Annie Are You OK performed at Robot Havoc 5 at the Science Alive Festival. And I am going to say right up front, before we get really too far into this, Annie had no work done to her between the event in the UK and arriving here in Australia and fighting. Literally, after that event, I took the battery out of her, I wrapped her in a towel, and she travelled with me through the UK. She then jumped on a plane with me and came back. I arrived like Friday evening and I had work to do on my featherweight. So she basically got unwrapped at the event, a brand new battery put into her, or a freshly charged battery put into her, and she was thrown into fights. That also does mean that while I had the disc with me at the event, I was just assuming that whatever curse had happened to this thing while it was in the UK, that it had carried over. So while I did bring it to the event and it was there set up and ready to run, I never touched it. I did not put the disc on for the entirety of the event because I just did not want to bring whatever that was back into this particular event. And I had 4 robots that I was running, so I didn't have time to be dealing with curses. The second thing to talk about here is that the beta weights will run in the featherweight arena. If you watched last week's video, you know that the featherweight arena was a massive arena. If not, I will link it down below. Check it out, because it was good fun. But we fought the beta weights in a smaller section of the featherweight arena, and this was done because the featherweight arena was set up with a grandstand around it, and the public was able to sit in the grandstand basically at any time. So the featherweights were only fighting every other hour because that, people need time to repair featherweights. They are a big thing. You need a lot of time to get these things working. And so in the middle of that, we were throwing the beta weights into this main arena so that the crowd had something interesting to watch and get a lot of people in and having a look at how awesome combat robots are. Because, if you're here watching this, I hope that you also think that combat robots are quite awesome. So that does mean that we are fighting in the big arena. There are low walls, which was a little bit risky, and also a permanently open pit, but thankfully only stuck away in one corner of the arena. So decently easy to avoid. Maybe. We'll see. And to see, we should start talking about fights. And up first is a robot called Mole's Brother. This is an interstate competitor that we haven't seen on the channel before. It is a horizontal spinner at the front and a YOLO drive system at the back, which is really, really cool. Going into this one, I thought that we might have a slight reach advantage over Mole's Brother, and I also was thinking that YOLO drive is quite tasty.
1. Fight!
It's got some bloody torquey motors in, huh? Ellie, can you stand? I'm not on my lap. Okay. I'm trying to help out with people, so just stand up.
And he's doing a lot of damage here.
Careful, Annie!
And he almost got tossed out of the arena.
Yeah, that motor completely gone.
Yeah. Oh, that's why he's going YOLO. Oh. It's been called.
I think we're calling here. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Annie Are You OK wins.
And tasty it is indeed. We got a couple of really good hits on the wheels, As it turns out, the wheels themselves didn't actually take that much damage. I've got one of the wheels here. They've got a nice little silicone around the outside. There's some very obvious shots on these wheels, but despite the fact that one of those wheels went down basically entirely, the wheel itself came out mostly intact because what happened was the motor mount inside the robot shattered instead, which is interesting because YOLO drive, you run the risk of having your motors be absolutely destroyed, but as it turns out, if you run a breakable motor mount, things actually work a little bit better. So a blade of armor is not just a blade of armor, you can also do a blade of motor mounts, apparently. This is interesting and something I might have to look into in the future. It was an interesting result from there. Also, in that fight, one of my chief worries about these low walls kind of almost came to pass, and he almost bounced out. We got the weapon up and stuck on the wall, and then fell back into the arena, which was interesting. Especially as in our round robin bracket, we do have one drum spinner coming up. That is Peter Griffin, a robot that if you've been around on this channel, you will know, and you will know has a rivalry with Annie, Are You Okay? But that fight is not up just yet. There is a few more fights to get through before we talk about Peter Griffin. So let's move on through into those next fights. Those next fights are Iron Tooth. Iron Tooth being the big, nasty, horizontal spinner from the ARC League. Iron Tooth has a massive horizontal spinner. It easily outreaches Annie every single time we've fought, and also has basically informed a number of armor upgrades that have needed to happen on Annie to basically make her survive fights like this one.
In 3, 2, 1, fight!
Whoa. That was a good hit.
I think Annie might be okay, but I'm not sure about Iron Tooth. So, if Iron Tooth can't show some controlled movement, we might need to count him out. And that's going to make it harder. They are slowly moving together, although Annie's lost. Oh! And victory goes to Annie, Are You Okay?
So hey, that actually went pretty well. I drove a lot better than I was expecting to drive. Going into this, I kind of was thinking back over a lot of the last fights that I've had with Iron Tooth, and also over some of the fights that I had in the UK, and thinking about the fact that I tend to drive very face first. I tend to spin my weapon up and drive directly into my opposition's weapon, which, while it does work for a lot of robots, really Annie is not that type of robot. Annie's really supposed to be about spinning up, biding time, and getting around to the side and getting those wheels. And so the game plan for Iron Tooth was to try and do that. And surprising, I think myself most of all, I managed that with two really good early shots to his wheels, which did start to cripple down his drive side, and kind of left him stuck on the wall. And that is also why I didn't engage there, because I had this thought in my brain of like, no, we're not doing weapon to weapon, we're not doing weapon to weapon. So normally when he was up against the wall like that, I would have just plowed straight into him to see what happened. And I didn't. I left him alone, and he then did a dataless and bounced his way off the wall back into the middle of the arena. And at that point, things were getting a little bit rough, and he did indeed lose that wheel. And I was like, this is it. I've maybe got a shot here. And I went to try and take the other wheel. He got a nice little spin in, and I was like, well, look, let's just invite the weapon hit and see what happens. And what happened was that the slight angle of his weapon meant that he went flying out of the arena. I got, I think, mostly caught up on his spare wheel that was lying in the arena and stayed where I was, which was lucky because I've gone too far. The open pit was right there for me to fall into. But we did get very lucky, and we got a good bounce in this case with somebody else going out of the arena and not us, which is very, very nice. Also, at this point, we are 2 wins into our round robin bracket, which is good news. We love to see it. Annie is performing pretty well, especially considering that, again, nothing has really happened to her since fighting all the way over in the UK. I mean, she still, at this point, and even now, has hot glue on her wheels holding the wheel hubs in that I put on while I was over in the UK. And it's working. Let's see if we continue on working on through to this next fight. Next fight up is a robot called Choppy. It is a very, very large scoop made out of a single chopping board and a bunch of other HDP around it. It is made by Jamie, the same person who makes Irontooth, but in this competition, rather than driving it himself, he had his son drive it, one of the youngest drivers in our competition at this point in time.
So ready to fight in 3, 2, 1, fight! So again, we have a 6-year-old driving Choppy. Oh, and Choppy goes in the pit!
So, yep, that was unfortunate, and yeah, there's not really a lot I can say about this fight. I'm a little bit glad because Choppy is a tough robot. It is almost impossible to knock Choppy out, and even with something like Annie, where I can get in underneath and start trying to cut at wheels and stuff, in the past it has been damn near impossible to knock Choppy out in any given fight that you're in, which, yeah. So the fact that there was an open pit and unfortunately a very young driver who made a driving error and put Choppy in the pit worked out in my favour. It's unfortunate, and obviously at a regular competition that wouldn't have happened. Now that the pits and stuff are repaired in our main Beetle arena, that wouldn't have happened during that fight, and it wouldn't have been that short. But as it is what it is, and Annie has 3 wins moving into our fight against Peter Griffin. So, as mentioned, Peter Griffin is a egg beater spinner. It is a robot that Annie has had a bit of a rivalry with in the past because there is a nice little win-loss thing going with Peter Griffin. But I was also terrified going into this fight. No other robot in our league has made Annie fly quite as much as Peter Griffin. Thankfully, usually in those type of situations, if Annie's weapon is going, Annie pops straight up and back down again. But with the open walls in this arena, I was just very worried that we were going to go flying out of the arena. We did indeed go flying out of the arena. That is exactly what I was worried about, but there's not much I can do about that, really. That is just the way that fight went. I mean, there was a little bit of a concern there. As Annie's spin-ups kind of dropped off a little bit, she wasn't spinning up as fast as she has been spinning up in previous fights up until this point, which is always just a touch concerning. I don't like when the weapon system starts having issues, because at this point the weapon system should be a solved problem. Everything should work exactly as it needs to. But, you know, apparently in this case, something was just not being all that happy. I mean, it's not really a detriment at this point. It wasn't really a detriment in the fight. It was just a thing that I felt on the sticks personally. I was like, oh, this spin-up isn't what I want it to be. So between this fight and the next fight, I did indeed change the weapon belt, because I was thinking that maybe the weapon belt was burning and slipping a little bit too much on the new aluminium front pulley. But we'll see how that goes, because there is indeed a next fight with 3 wins. Annie is on through into the finals, and we are up against a robot called Scale, which is an impressive feat of engineering. This thing is tiny. It is one of the most compact beetle weights I've seen. It is smaller than like almost an ant weight. It's certainly smaller than some of the ant weights I've built in terms of height. It is also an omni-drive drum. It is just a very, very cool piece of kit. I would also say, I think my favorite thing about it is that its diameter is smaller than the diameter of Iron Tooth's weapon, which is just... Not have put the new belt on between the Peter Griffin fight and the scale fight. I'm pretty sure I put the new belt on after this fight because the spin-up times in this fight were trash. So bad, and Scale capitalized on them early and hard. There was a good chunk of time in this fight where I could barely get spinning, and every time I got somewhere, he was right on top of me and slammed into me and made sure that the weapon stopped spinning again. The only saving grace that I had here is that the tiny drum on Scale doesn't have a whole lot of tooth engagement and wasn't really able to throw Annie up and around as much. So that meant that I was less likely to be thrown out of the arena, which gave me a little bit more confidence to take some time, get away, and start spinning up. Eventually, though, we did manage to actually find that space, get the weapon up to speed, and that's when the turntables all the way turned. Because with the weapon spun up, we could actually start taking some proper shots at Scale and doing fun things like bending out the armor panel just entirely. This thing is probably one of my favorite pieces of damage that Annie has ever done. The way this thing has bent and kind of buckled is just really interesting. And I really love this piece. It's so good. But the armor panel is not the only thing that we got. With the weapon up to speed, that hit then allowed us to keep on going and kind of, throw the momentum of this fight back in the other direction, hitting his weapon with another hit and stopping it entirely. There is a piece of titanium in that drum, which we sandwiched into the basically internal weapon motor and caused all of that to just stop and break, which is amazing. I didn't know that Annie had that much power, but apparently, yes, indeed she does. And then, of course, that meant that we were the only thing out there with a weapon, and so we went to town. And in going to town, we knocked out one of the 3 Omni wheels. There are, if you go back and have a look, there is a point where you can see Omnis shatter across the arena, which is very cool to see. And that point, he has some movement problems because, I mean, Omnis, as we've seen on this channel in the past, you take a reduction in traction to have the omnidirectional movement situation happening, and when you're down to 2 of those, yeah, you do end up having a little bit more drive issue. He then, of course, got high-sided on something, which it's not all that difficult to do. The arena is an arena that's used by featherweights as well, and he has ridiculously low ground clearance. He did ask me to hit him again, however, I was like, oh, I mean, you are, personally, I don't think I'd registered at that point that his weapon had gone down, and, you know, we were in a semi-final fight. I was kind of happy to back off and just let the count out happen in that particular case, especially considering how well he had stayed on Annie for the first half of this fight and made sure that I couldn't really do any damage. With all of that said, Annie is now through to the grand final, and this time we are up against a whole nother drum spinner. This one is a robot called Bucktooth, again another interstate competitor, one that I think I have fought before on this channel in one of the previous Robot Havoc videos, and this is it. This is the grand final. This is the fight for all the marbles, and of course, we are going up against another drum spinner, so that ever-present risk of being thrown out of the arena is back at us again. Yeah, that must have been where we changed the belt over, because the spin-up was a little bit better going into this fight. I think there might be something up with the ESC, because I have a brand new ESC in here that I had put in for the UK as well, but I don't know, there's something that I need to have a look at, I think. Anyway, talking about this fight, again, I was trying to make sure that all of our engagements were closer to the middle of the arena, because again, trying not to have the whole get robots thrown out of the arena thing happen. And our first big engagement, like there was a couple of little nicky engagements, but the first one that made an actual decent sound, I actually got, I think, the front right-hand wheel on his robot. And after that point, he was crab walking a little bit, but still able to be fairly maneuverable. And thankfully that kind of happened in the middle of the arena, so I was still happy to go in and engage. And that second big hit was the one that popped Annie up in the air a decent way, and I was like, oh yeah, good thing that we are doing this in the middle of the arena and not out at the edges. But that hit also did send him spiraling across to the corner, and he's crab walking a little bit, but still spinning his weapon, still spinning up, still doing everything. So I decided to get a little bit cheeky. We were at the finals in front of a gigantic crowd. So I think for the first time in this entire competition, I put the stick all the way to 100%, and I let Annie spin up. And if you listen to the approach on that final hit, you can hear Annie's blade whir all the way up to its highest speed, or fairly close to. I don't think I let it get all the way to the top, but certainly the highest it had been for most of that competition. And then there was the one big crack, and both robots left the arena. So technically that was a double KO. There was a quick discussion about whether or not we were going to throw the robots back into the arena and keep going. However, despite the fact that upon landing Annie spun round okay and was still driving pretty well, within like a couple of movements there, one wheel started binding up and she was crab walking a little bit. She was still drivable, but she was crabbing around a little bit. And essentially, the judges at the side of the arena said, no, we are going to, that's it, call the match. And we're going to go to a judge decision because it is a double KO, which is fair enough. And through the judge's decision, we did the thing. We won ARC's Havoc 5 in the Beetleweight arena, which is incredible considering everything that had happened and everything that was happening around the outside of this. It's just insane that that is how this story ends. That Annie did so poorly on her first day in the UK. I finally got her working again on the second day, and then leaving her and not doing anything to her, she managed to come through for me and come all the way and get a first place at Havoc, which is incredible. Also, I will say too that after we pulled the robots out of the arena, one side of my drive locked up entirely. I was sitting there going, oh, that's a bit crunchy, turning it by hand, and in turning it by hand, it got to the point that it is completely locked. I think I've actually destroyed something in the gearbox on that side of drive, which is unfortunate, but these things happen. And it also meant that unfortunately I couldn't go in the Rumble because the Rumble was basically immediately after the Beetleweight finals, and so I was going to put Annie back in the Rumble, but instead had to not, because one side of her drive was just not working. And so that is the end of Annie's fights here at ARC's Havoc 5. Now, the next thing that I'm going to say might upset some people. I currently don't know what I'm going to do with Beetleweights moving forwards. I'm kind of getting to the point with Annie where I'm either going to make some radical changes to Annie. We're going to go back to some brushless drive. We're going to do something like put a hub motor in Annie. Like, we're going to make a whole lot of changes very, very quickly. Or we're going to retire Annie and we're going to make all of those changes to a brand new robot. And I don't know yet. I don't know where I'm sitting or what I want to do with Annie at this point in time. If you have opinions on what you think we should do with Annie, please let me know in the comments down below. But I am kind of getting to the point of wanting to move on a little bit from Annie. There was a lot of holding on to Annie that was kind of taking her back to the UK. I was hoping that I could fight some of the people that I fought in Battlebots, but unfortunately it seems like those robots have also been retired or have moved on or have new versions, and revenge and rematches in the UK isn't a thing that I can really hold Annie for anymore. So she also went over and she won a judge's decision in the UK, which was some redemption and revenge in its own right. So it does feel like now would be an appropriate time to retire her, now that she is on top of her game, apparently, and having just come back from the UK and redeemed herself a little bit over there at the same time. Again, it's just a thing that I'm thinking about. I'm not quite sure yet. We will see how we go. I mean, building a new Beetle is going to take time, so it may be that Annie gets one last run in another event before I build a brand new Beetle, or while I'm building a brand new Beetle. I don't know. We will see as we go through. Anyway, just a final little closing thought there. I hope you have all enjoyed this one, and I will see you in the next video.